It's the first Sunday after Christmas, and I've been contemplating Mary's song. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for you have looked with favor on the lowliness of your servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is your name. Your mercy is for those who fear you from generation to generation. You have shown strength with your arm. You have scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. You have brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. You have filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. You have helped your servant Israel in remembrance of your mercy, according to the promise you made to our ancestors, to Abraham and, we might add, Sarah and Hagar, and to their descendants forever. It's been one of my favorite texts from the Christian tradition for as long as I can remember. It's the exhilaration of hope, the certainty that the arc of the moral universe really does bend toward justice. And it continues to inspire both my faith and my activism, especially in the face of all the terrible and terribly unnecessary suffering that fills our world. In Luke's gospel, Mary does not just give birth to Jesus, she also gives birth to this vision of a world where relationships are made right, where mercy and justice meet together and become the closest of friends. Unfortunately, my very pleasant, hopeful contemplations were rudely interrupted this week by a very different proclamation. Last Tuesday, the outgoing Vice President Mike Pence addressed a large indoor crowd, many of whom were not wearing masks, blatantly rejecting our best knowledge and practices of how to guard public health during a pandemic. But public health wasn't so much on Pence's mind, not when he could use that opportunity to prop up multiple systems of oppression. At one point, he said, "When we cut taxes, roll back regulations, and advance freedom, their agenda is higher taxes, open borders, socialized medicine, a Green New Deal, and abortion on demand." Now, really key into the next thing he says. They want to make rich people poorer and poor people more comfortable. We have fought to make every American richer, and that's exactly what we've done. Now, frankly, there's enough material in that short quote for a whole month full of sermons. Trump's tax cuts, like 40 years of tax cuts before him, have devastated the economy for everyone but the corporations and the very rich. Trump's dangerous deregulatory actions will likely threaten our public health for decades to come. And rather than advancing freedom, Trump's administration has been objectively complicit in and often accelerated the decline of freedom. On the other hand, Pence's list of policies he'd like us to avoid, which I'd reframe as healing economic and social disparities, creating humane and just immigration policies, guaranteeing health care access, addressing climate change and environmental injustice issues, and protecting reproductive rights. All of those are actually vital policies for the survival of millions of people and the earth itself. They shouldn't be partisan or controversial at all. In fact, what my conservative friends and family often name as merely political questions, as in, you shouldn't let this come between us, it's just a political argument, these are more fundamentally ethical questions. We may debate the nuts and bolts of how, for instance, to make sure we have clean air and drinking water, but nobody should be disagreeing over this basic human right. Everybody deserves clean air and safe drinking water. Everyone, without exception. As another example, we do need to have ongoing conversations about our borders and the immigration policies and practices that go with them. They need to be continuously updated to adapt to the unfolding sociopolitical realities in the world. It's important for us to listen and change them as needed so that immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees can be treated with dignity and respect while accessing the safety and opportunities that every human being deserves. But what should never, ever be included in that conversation is entertaining the possibility of choosing policies that have created the nightmare that continues along the United States southern border. It's very striking to me that Pence is not lying about what he stands for. He's very open in promoting failed and unjust policies. Moreover, he's given a basic description of several key commitments of those he would call his enemy. But the policies he supports cannot be called good according to any ethical, humane, or compassionate standard. To claim the moral high ground is a tale of convenience. It's a delusion that relieves the cognitive dissonance of being complicit in injustice. And Pence is implying that this is the moral high ground, that these are the good, the preferable, the just policies. But instead, he is excusing and even justifying injustice. He's propping up a system that benefits those who are hoarding wealth and power. And that is why we cannot allow people like Mike Pence to frame questions of morality in this or any other way. We need to sing it out like Mary did. And this is one of the reasons why the tradition of Jesus and the prophets continues to be a vital part of our broader cultural memory and political ethos. Mary sang about political and economic justice, that God's mercy meant bringing down the powerful from their thrones and lifting up the lowly. She sang about filling the hungry with good things and sending the rich away empty. And Jesus' ministry was understood as good news to the poor, freeing prisoners, giving sight for the blind, and setting the oppressed free, in contrast to the false gospel of so many Christian churches today. Mary and Jesus did not separate out material concerns from spiritual ones when it came to salvation. They were not content to let people suffer injustice, and they did not offer a spiritual promise of some future salvation as a way to better tolerate present oppression. We might ask then, so how bad were things in Mary's and Jesus' day? What was so terrible that would make them put these concerns so front and center in their songs and in their ministries? Marcus Borg simplified the economic situation at the time of Jesus like this: 66% of the wealth was controlled by 10% of the population, the ruling elites. These were the only people in society that had an easygoing confidence that they would go to bed at night with a full belly. 90% of the population, in turn, the peasants, were left to share 33% of the resources. And share here is a really nice euphemism. In reality, the poor were set in competition against one another, left to eke out an existence on the crumbs from the elite's tables. There was plenty of resistance to this competition through hospitality, through unexpected generosity and other kindnesses, but the reality was that because the rich hoarded wealth and power, the peasants were doomed to live in uncertainty. If you're like me, your mind immediately asks, so what would this look like today? Would Mary have anything to sing about today? As it turns out, we could write a new verse, but the chorus would be the same. In 2016, the bottom 90% of the population in the United States owned only 21.2% of the nation's wealth. Now remember, in Jesus' day, it was 10% controlled 66%. It's worse in 2016 to today, where 10% owe over 88% of the nation's wealth. And as you might have imagined, it's gotten worse over the last 4 years. This awfulness has only intensified this year, as the very rich are capitalizing on the economic and social vulnerabilities accompanying the pandemic to get even wealthier. I know I've said this before, but bear with me because I need to express my grief again, because it is beyond heartless and cruel to see all the enormous suffering in the world and think to yourself, oh, well, this would be a good time to turn my billions into more billions. This cruelty, though, just passes as good business in the United States of America. Based on research from Forbes magazine, the total net worth of the nation's 651 billionaires rose from $2.95 trillion on March 18th, which was roughly the start of the pandemic shutdowns, to $4.01 trillion on December 7th. That is a leap of 36%. I don't know how to be more blunt. There is no compassionate, ethical, or humane way to be rich like this. These kinds of disparities can only exist at the expense of human lives and well-being, at the expense of the earth itself. Even Time magazine knows this is wrong. Writing last September, Nick Hanauer and David Rolfe pointed out, in addressing the causes and consequences of this pandemic and its cruelly uneven impact, the elephant in the room is extreme income inequality. How big is the elephant? A staggering $50 trillion. That is how much the upward redistribution of income has cost American workers over the past several decades. We can argue about where the line is when it comes to hoarding wealth and power, but I hope we can agree that there is a line. And by the time you've hoarded $1 billion or billions of dollars, you are way beyond that line. The greed and delusion of the super rich has and will continue to kill millions of people, and it is killing the earth. There is no compassionate, ethical, or humane way to be rich like this. I'll even, break out some of my religious language here and say, it is not only wrong, it is wicked. It is sinful. Why? These systems are choking people to death. The wealthy and powerful of this world are starving the masses, and those who survive are condemned to inhumane and intolerable conditions. Pence claims that the Trump administration has made every American richer, but it's just a lie. The Time article went on to explain the real-life impacts of this pilfering of the common citizen of in the United States in granular demographic detail. They wrote, for example, are you a typical black man earning $35,000 a year? You're being paid at least $26,000 a year less than you would have had income distributions held constant. Are you a college-educated, prime-age, full-time worker earning $72,000 a year? Depending on the inflation index used, rising inequality is costing you between $48,000 and $63,000 a year. But whatever your race, gender, educational attainment, urbanicity, or income, the data show if you earn below the 90th percentile, the relentlessly upward redistribution of income since 1975 is coming out of your pocket. Thankfully, there are those who, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, are still speaking up and speaking out against injustice. Let me give just 3 examples. First, Representative Omar of Minnesota refused to back down from calling out the failure of our government to meaningfully respond to the pandemic in just, compassionate, and humane ways. In response to the most recent $900 billion relief measure, which saw a paltry $600 check as relief for the common citizen, she pointed out, we are not embarrassed enough as leaders. She went on to say, it's really quite shameful that we find ourselves negotiating a deal with such a small amount of money when we know just how devastated the American people are across the country. She's kept singing. And if we were listening this week, we would have also heard the song of justice in the face of oppression in Detroit. Last August, plaintiffs from the local movement for Black Lives sued the city government for police violence, including bruised and broken ribs, concussions, a collapsed lung, a fractured pelvis. The activists sought to prohibit police use of tools of excessive force, including chemical weapons, sonic cannons, and rubber bullets. You would think these should be obvious requests. Why would we be using these at all? And last month, a temporary order restricted the use of force. The court agreed. However, this last week, the city made their response. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't, you're right, we're going to change things because Black lives do matter. No, it was a countersuit that accused these civil rights advocates of a civil conspiracy. In their words, they would conspire together to disturb the peace, engage in disorderly conduct, incite riots, destroy public property, and commit other illegal acts. This is just intimidation, pure and simple. But the movement leaders have refused to be intimidated, adding another verse to the cloud of witnesses who sing out for justice. Tristan Taylor, one of the original plaintiffs, replied, "These attacks against us are a way of attempting to minimize our ability to go on the offensive and call for transparency and accountability. This is just a way of saying to people, this is not a place where you can raise your voice." And Nakia Wallace, a Detroit Will Breathe leader, also spoke out. She said, "They're trying to send a message to the Black Lives Matter movement, to anybody standing up against state power and trying to hold them accountable. This moment is an opportunity to bring forth meaningful change and the responsibility to not allow ourselves to be co-opted or silenced or bullied off the street." In solidarity with these movements, we can also bring our attention to Emily Gorzinski, a data scientist dedicated to exposing members of the far right and cataloging white supremacist violence across the U.S. She has a website that does this called First Vigil. And she's been doing this work since the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. And although she's had to relocate to Berlin for her own safety, she continues to work from there. In an interview from last October, she said, "White supremacy is not purely a racial concept. It's fundamentally racist, but it's also fundamentally anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-trans, anti-disability. It's about purification through whiteness and through maleness and through the consolidation of power. There's a diversity of strategies we can have on how to build a world that is resilient to fascism. Protest is part of that. So is community involvement. One of the most effective things that people can do is learn ways that they can help their neighbors and community in direct ways that don't rely on governments and the state and other systems. The fundamental principle of anti-fascism is mutual aid. People ask, how do you fight Nazis? I say, learn Spanish so you can translate for immigrants. Learn how to fix a taillight so you can keep somebody from getting pulled over on a bullshit charge. Find ways to lift each other up, to better help others. These are the kinds of leaders and activists we need to be listening to and listening for. It's easy to hear what Mike Pence has to say, and we obviously need to pay attention to his words so we can mitigate the harm that he does. But it's even more important to listen to these other voices, the voices insisting on lifting up the lowly and filling the hungry, because they are less likely to be heard amid the noise of injustice, and also because they provide practical, relevant, and radical ways to move forward. As I was considering all of this, I found myself asking, so who was listening to Mary all those years ago? And in my imagination, I see Mary raising Jesus with these convictions and aspirations. And I hear Mary's song in Jesus' ministry. When we listen, we can learn that the divine is seen most clearly in the way we treat each other, in the way we give up violence and greed, and learn to live in ways so that no one is exploited, no one is hungry, and everyone is blessed. It's obvious that we have a long road ahead of us, and it's hard to keep up with the injustices that fill the news, let alone act on them. Sometimes the most we can do, the best we can do, is to keep singing, insisting that justice and mercy have a place in this world. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. Mary's song has survived millennia of injustices right up to this present day. So that even during a week when we had to bear witness to a lame duck president who has cruelly and vigorously pursued the federal death penalty, even while shamelessly pardoning a laundry list of crooked and violent offenders. I mean, the Blackwater guards, good grief. Even in the midst of that, we can keep our bearings. Right now, it's true. The powerful still sit on their thrones, secured by the violence and oppression against the lowly. Right now, it's true. The rich are being filled with good things, ignoring the hungry. Right now, it's true. It's hard to imagine a world where mercy is the norm. But Mary knew, and she kept the faith. And Jesus learned from Mary, and Jesus knew and kept the faith. And millions have known and kept the faith. And we can know it too. We do know it too. And we can learn to sing, and we can remember to sing the message that keeps us going, that your mercy is for those who fear you from generation to generation. You've shown strength with your arm. You have scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. You've brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. You have filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. You've helped your servant Israel in remembrance of your mercy, according to the promise you made to our ancestors, to Abraham, to Sarah and Hagar, and to their descendants forever. It may be harder to hear that song. There's so much other noise. But it is sweeter to sing. And the more of us who are singing it out with our words and with our lives, the easier it will be to listen and change the world and rejoice. Merry Christmas.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.